So in this video, we're going to have a look at a couple of the influences questions, the 4 markers. So this one is explain 2 ways that belief in the crucifixion of Jesus influences Christians today. So the first point to note is that you need to show from your answer that you know what the belief in crucifixion actually is. It needs to be really clear to the examiner that you have the knowledge of what the crucifixion beliefs are. And secondly, of course, it's a 4 marker, so you're going to need to give 2 developed points that show how the beliefs Christians have about the crucifixion are going to influence them today. So that means, what do Christians believe or think or do because of the beliefs they have about the crucifixion? So before we go any further, let's just remind ourselves what Christians actually believe about the crucifixion. So remember, crucifixion was not something that was unique to Jesus. It was a common Roman method of execution that was designed to cause humiliation and also deter other people from committing crime. We know from historical records actually that Jesus was crucified around 30 to 33 AD during the rule of the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, and that before being nailed to his cross, Jesus was mocked, beaten, and crowned with a crown of thorns. The crucifixion occurred on a Friday, and that's now remembered as Good Friday by Christians. In terms of the wider beliefs about the crucifixion, clearly Christians have quite significant beliefs about it. So they believe Jesus' death was a sacrifice for the sins of humanity, an act of atonement. Christianity also teaches that Jesus was both fully God and fully human, of course, and the crucifixion really clearly demonstrates that Jesus was fully human, as he suffered and died on the cross and experienced pain, just as a regular human would, if you like. We know this because in the Bible it states that when he was close to death, Jesus cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" really illustrating that he was genuinely suffering and in pain at the time. So in terms of how the beliefs about the crucifixion that we just outlined influence Christians, well, since Jesus suffered during the crucifixion, we know because he shouted out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Many Christians believe that he fully understood and continues to understand human suffering and pain. This helps the Son of God and God incarnate seem personal and close. And as a result, many Christians are influenced to turn to Jesus in prayer when they experience suffering themselves, as they believe that Jesus understands what they're going through, since he also experienced pain and suffering at his death. Beliefs about the crucifixion also influence Christians in terms of their religious practice. So they influence Christians to remember Jesus' death on Good Friday by attending church. Special, solemn and serious services are held, of course, on Good Friday to remember Jesus' death, and the story of his crucifixion is also read in the church. Special processions may even be made through the church, led by a person carrying a replica cross. So if we're going to take what we've just reviewed and apply it to a 4 marker, let's have a look how that could play out. So let's have a look at the first section here. Christians believe that Jesus fully experienced the pain of his crucifixion. One way that this belief influences them is that they're influenced to turn to Jesus in prayer when they experience suffering, as they believe Jesus understands what they are going through, since he also experienced pain and suffering. Second point, Christians believe that Jesus was crucified to save us from sin. This influences them to be grateful to Jesus for this act of atonement and to attend special solemn services in church on Good Friday to remember the events of the crucifixion. So if you note here, I've put a little tick each time a mark would be earned. I want you to notice specifically that I've used the term influences throughout my answer, so in both sections. That's a really important way to flag to the examiner that you're really trying hard to answer the question and that you are tailoring your knowledge specifically to try and show the idea of influences. I also want you to note that there's a kind of an overlap, isn't there, between beliefs and practices. And it's quite important that we kind of understand that. So the crucifixion of Jesus, of course, is a topic in the Christian beliefs section. But one of the main ways that any belief influences someone who's religious is through what they do in terms of their religious practice. Okay, so in the Christian practices section, we studied all about the celebration of Easter and kind of how in the run-up to Easter, there are these services to remember the events of the crucifixion. And so thinking about the overlap between beliefs and practices is kind of a really helpful tip, hopefully, that you can apply when it comes to doing these influences questions. Of course, in the first point that I've made, I've also talked about prayer, okay, which again is a Christian practice, but the belief is influencing Christians to carry out that practice. Let's move on then to another kind of related question, which is explain 2 ways that belief in the resurrection of Jesus influences Christians today. Again, you need to show from your answer that you clearly know what Christians actually believe about the resurrection. And again, it's an influences question, so you need to give the 2 developed points that connect the belief with the influences on Christians today. So what do Christians believe or think or do? How do they practice their religion because of the beliefs they have about resurrection? So again, let's just remind ourselves of the key content, right? So what do Christians believe about the resurrection? Well, Christians believe Jesus rose from the dead on the 3rd day after his crucifixion, and that's celebrated by Christians as Easter Sunday. The tomb at the resurrection was found empty by his women followers, by Jesus' women followers, including Mary Magdalene. And the angels announced to the women that Jesus had risen. Now, the resurrection confirms for Christians the belief that Jesus was fully God because he had the power to rise up after death. Christians also believe that the resurrection of Jesus is really important because it offers hope of eternal life and the promise that everybody who believes in Jesus can also be resurrected in heaven. So the resurrection is a really important symbol in Christianity of new life and a fresh start, fresh beginnings, and also the promise of eternal life as well. So in terms of like how the beliefs in the resurrection influence Christians today, clearly Jesus showed he was fully human through the crucifixion, but then in the resurrection demonstrates that he's fully God with the power to defeat death and defeat evil. This will clearly influence Christians to pray to Jesus. You know, he is so powerful, and they may well pray to Jesus to show that they believe in this story. They believe that Jesus had the power to rise from the dead because he really was the Son of God. And since they believe that Jesus was able to rise from the dead, Christians may well also be influenced to believe in the promise of their own eternal life and resurrection to come after they die. Remember that Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will have life in my name." And this may influence Christians to not be afraid of their own death. On Easter Sunday, Christians may also be influenced by their belief in the resurrection to attend church and to go along and listen to the retelling of the story, share hopeful messages and prayers and Easter services, to celebrate by eating eggs and spending time with family, and all of those really important ways to celebrate the Easter season. So how would this look in an actual 4 marker? Again, let's have a little look at this model answer here. So Christians believe Jesus rose from the dead after 3 days in the tomb. One way this belief influences them is that since they believe Jesus was able to rise from the dead, they'll be influenced to believe in the promise of their own eternal life and resurrection, and they will not be afraid of death. So one clear point there that's been developed, okay? A second way that the belief in Jesus' resurrection influences Christians today is that on Easter Sunday, Christians will attend special church services to join together as a community and remember the story of Jesus rising from the dead through prayer and worship. So 2 things that I just want you to notice here before we finish. Number 1, it's very clear from both of the sections here that I know what resurrection is. Okay, it's really clear. So that's what we're aiming for. And secondly, note how there's a little gap between my 2 points, my 2 developed points. That can really help to demonstrate to the examiner kind of that you're trying to give these 2 developed points. It makes it easier for everybody to read. And if you notice, I've also used the phrase, one way that this belief influences them, and then a second way that the belief in Jesus' resurrection influences. So I use the words of the question to hopefully try and make my answer as clear as possible for the examiner, in the hope that I'll earn all the marks. And again, you can see there kind of where the different marks are potentially earned.